Hey everybody, it's Zach here. Welcome back to Clapperboard, where I'll be doing another movie review. This time I'm going to be reviewing Thor Ragnarok. Thor Ragnarok stars Chris Hemsworth, Tom Hiddleson, Cate Blanchett, Idris Elba, and Jeff Goldblum. It's directed by Taika Waititi, and it revolves around the character of Thor, played by Chris Hemsworth, who after defeating the fire demon Surtur, discovers that his father, Odin, is dying. Once he passes, his firstborn Hela, the goddess of death, is released from her long imprisonment to take over Asgard. So it's up to Thor and his friends to stop her before it's too late. Alright guys, I would like to start off this review by saying that the director of this movie, Taika Waititi, is actually a New Zealand director, and I live in New Zealand. I was born in New Zealand. This is where I live. And when I heard that, of all people, it would be him, Taika Waititi, directing a Thor movie, I had mixed feelings about it, because although it's great that he's now directing a Hollywood movie, he's going down, the path of, sort of another filmmaker from New Zealand, Peter Jackson, who obviously did The Lord of the Rings. Basically, I'm going to be honest with you guys, I didn't like the first Thor movie. The first Thor movie, there were many problems I had with it, but the main one stemmed from the fact that the character of Thor, I just never related to him. I felt he was too arrogant and cocky of a character for us to really connect with him and sympathize with him. And there were plenty of other problems I had with the film, but ultimately the first Thor movie, out of all the Marvel movies I'd watched, alongside X-Men, I really didn't care for it. It wasn't a bad movie or a terrible movie. I just wasn't a fan of it. And ultimately, when I heard that Taika Waititi, who is essentially representing my country as a filmmaker, when I heard he would be directing the third in the Thor series, I was quite surprised, and I didn't really know what to make of it. Having seen the movie, I can safely say that Thor Ragnarok is really good. It's energetic, it's action-packed, it's full of plenty of humour. It is a really good movie. I really enjoyed it. It was a great experience to have in the theatres. However, despite all of that, there was one particular thing which kind of bogged down the experience for me, and I will ultimately talk about that later in the review, but I'll start off my review of Thor Ragnarok with the things I liked about the movie, because there were a lot of things to like about it. I'll start off by talking about the opening action scene, because the opening action scene where Thor defeats the fire demon Surtur was honestly one of the best action scenes in the movie. I thought it was very well done in many levels. I particularly enjoyed the cinematography when Thor was flinging his hammer around the room and it was spinning everywhere, and the camera was following it, and it led to some really creative special effects and cinematography. There were a lot of really funny moments leading up to that action scene too, a lot of humour, and really a lot of it, and I will get to this in a moment, a lot of it built around the, foundations of what Taika Waititi as a director has solidified in his track record of films, because I have seen quite a few of his films, and it really did, the humour in this film really did follow on the basis of what he's already established, which I really enjoyed. Getting back to topic though, the action scene was very energetic, very well done, and ultimately, it's definitely one of the highlights of the movie, coming around at the very beginning, and it did grab me and suck me into the movie, and really, it really does hype you in terms of what you're about to see. In terms of the acting for the film, it was all pretty much solid all the way through. Chris Hemsworth, once again, plays Thor. And I enjoyed Thor in this film way more than I did in the first Thor movie. As I mentioned before, Thor in the first movie, I found him to be too much of an arrogant character for me to sympathise with. He was very cocky, he was very unlikable, and although that was part of his arc into becoming a better character, I still found it hard to sympathise with him, at least for the first half of the movie. Thor in this movie is generally much more likeable, and I thought Chris Hemsworth's performance, while it was similar to his performance in the first movie, it came off as much more charming and much more enjoyable to watch. In terms of the acting from the rest of the cast, it was all pretty much solid all the way out. Particularly Tom Hiddleston as Loki, thought he was particularly good, thought he was particularly posh, and also quite quirky at moments. I really enjoyed his performance. There were no actors that really stood out as being weaker than the rest. They were all very good, they all did their jobs well. But the standout cast member, in my opinion, who did really, really well, was Cate Blanchett as Hela, the goddess of death. She was amazing in the film. I actually thought hers was the best performance. I really enjoyed seeing her own this role, and I have seen her in a few other films. This was a great performance. Really enjoyed her. Really liked the way her character was written. Thought she was written really well. And definitely a really good villain. I did like her as the villain, and I thought that as a villain, she had a good motivation. The fact that, you know, she is the firstborn. She has the right to the throne. She grew up in a world where Thor and Loki weren't around, and her father, Odin, promised her a world where she would be able to rule. And, you know, it was a world that was under new rules and regulations than the one that Thor and Loki have experienced. And she wants to bring it back to that. It was a reasonably good motivation, and I really thought that as a villain, she was really well written, particularly her dialogue. Really liked her as a character, and Blanchett, her performance was great. Jeff Goldblum was also particularly good in the scenes he was in, particularly during the scenes in the arena, even though he really doesn't have any dialogue in those moments. And also in other moments in the film, thought he was really enjoyable to watch, even though his role is arguably a more minor role than the rest of them. His character doesn't really provide that much of a purpose, but it was just cool that he was there. Regarding how the movie was done technically, as I mentioned before, there were moments where the cinematography definitely had its moments. The CGI, none of it really stuck out as being poor. Most of it was all acceptable. It looked pretty good, pretty impressive at moments. Although it did, as a lot of Marvel movies do, rely on the sort of big CG heavy spectacle overload sort of thing, which is something that I was hoping they would cut down on. But, you know, it's a Thor movie, it's a Marvel movie, you kind of gotta expect those sorts of things from superhero movies, so I was able to let that off. In terms of its colour palette and aesthetics, it does deliver basically what the posters promise you, a sort of very neon, glowy, sort of yellowy orange tinted movie, a lot of that sort of grading and colour correction going on through it, very bright colours that do hit you in the face. Although, I will admit, it does still linger on that sort of grey, flat, digital cinematography look, which there was an excellent video made about it, which I will leave a link in the description below to that, because it is a very good video on why Marvel movies should really sort of correct their colour grading for their movies, because admittedly, while this movie, it did look quite attractive at moments, it still lingered on that kind of flat, digital cinematography sort of look that I think they need to improve on. The set design was particularly impressive as well, and another thing I would like to discuss about this movie was the score. Now, this is something that Marvel has received a little bit of flack for over the past few years, I've noticed. Marvel's musical scores have generally not really been that memorable, unlike, say, the musical themes of franchises such as James Bond or Star Wars or, you know, franchises like that. In most of Marvel's movies, and including the ones that I've seen, there have been no musical moments that are generally really memorable. The scores are considered to be quite generic. The score for Thor Ragnarok is not great. It is not a great score, but it's a good score. There were quite a few moments where the score did stick out to me, where the score did have its moments, just like the cinematography. It, you know, had those moments where it was able to shine, particularly during the end credits. The majority of the movie, the score was serviceable, but again, it did lean towards that sort of more generic, you know, not really that noticeable sort of, you know, music. But it did have its moments where it did stick out, particularly during some of the moments with the characters and other moments during the action scenes. Character-wise, though, I do think Thor Ragnarok could have been improved in terms of characters. And now, don't get me wrong, the characters are portrayed really well. I really like the way each of the characters were played and acted out and definitely fleshed out in terms of their personalities, but I felt like some of the characters were, and my sister actually did mention this, she thought that some of the characters were quite hard to connect to, and I did have a problem with some of the overall storylines of the characters. I thought that Thor needed more of an arc. Regardless of what I thought of his character in the first movie, he at least transformed throughout the movie. In this movie, there wasn't a lot that changed about him in the course of the storyline. He pretty much stays the same. He learns new things. He, spoiler alert, kind of gets injured and stuff like that. And they've definitely given him more of a vulnerability to him that I definitely appreciated, sort of dialing down that superhero edge that filmmakers usually go for in these sorts of movies. Generally, though, I thought he needed more of an arc, and that also goes for other characters. There were characters that, sort of popped up out of nowhere, such as I've forgotten his name, but the guard character who becomes Hela's, quote-unquote, executioner, and, he sort of wants to be recognized, and he sort of wants to, be appreciated a lot more. And he becomes her executioner, but he's sort of having doubts about it. There were characters like him throughout a great majority of the movie which sort of came aboard and they didn't have that much of a storyline to them. It was a small arc that, kind of paid off, but not really. And I thought that there were aspects in the movie to that degree that could have been improved on. And then we get to the star of the show, which is the humor. The humor in this movie, and I did mention this before, but I'm going to go back to it here. The humor in the movie is arguably the star of the show. Taika Waititi, he's a director who knows how to make a really funny movie, regardless of the genre. Whether it's an action movie, whether it's an adventure movie, he knows how to set the mood through the humor. And the humor is very self-aware. It's that sort of humor that, I got the sense that the movie knew that it was one of those big-budget superhero movies. It knew it was one of those films where, you've got the superheroes doing their duty, being the heroes of the film. They do use that a lot. Thor does say, after all, that's what heroes are supposed to do. It was definitely that sort of self-aware type of humor that knew it was a superhero movie, that knew it was one of those big Hollywood action movies, and it sort of did occasionally mock that at times, satirized it, and I really liked that. And, the humor, it was generally sort of, standard Taika Waititi humor, which, by the way, is really funny. If you've watched the film, you will know that. The audience was laughing throughout the whole movie. I laughed a lot. I found it to be really funny. And ultimately, I think that's what made the movie a really light-hearted movie and a really fun movie to sit through. Because ultimately, I think if the humor hadn't been there, I think it would have been a lot more of a bleak and darker story. And it's something that Marvel movies are definitely known for their humor. And I think Taika Waititi brought a new level to that, which I was really happy with. So, basically, to summarize up the movie as a whole, it was a really good movie. Close to great. I mean, it was enjoyable, it was exciting, it was action-packed, it was funny. It was basically everything a good Marvel movie needs to be. I was really happy that Taika Waititi got to direct his first Hollywood film, and that it was a Marvel film, and that it's done really, really well in terms of reviews and box office and stuff like that. It was a really good movie. So why did I enjoy it not as much as I wanted to? And that is unfortunately the truth, guys. Thor Ragnarok was a really good movie, but ultimately, once I got out of the theatre, I felt unsatisfied. I felt like I just needed something more. And I spent the majority of when we were going home after the movie, I spent the majority of that time thinking, why didn't I enjoy the movie as much as everybody else has? Because everybody's saying it's great, and I thought it was really good. There were really not a lot of things to really properly dislike about it. It was well done. It's just like, why did I just feel quite flat at the end of it? Because I felt flat at the end of it. Why was that? I think it was the hype. I think it was the reception it got. I felt like Thor Ragnarok, despite the fact that it is a really great movie, I felt like maybe the hype was a bit too much. I felt like maybe that is what, flattened the experience for me. Because I feel like when all the reviews started coming out, when everybody started saying that it was really great, I feel like on that basis of the reception, I built up unrealistically high expectations, and I was ultimately set up to be slightly let down by the movie, and ultimately that is what happened. So when I came out of the theatre, despite the fact that the movie was a really great experience, I ultimately felt like I needed something a little more, which is a shame, but I think that's just what hype can do for some people, and ultimately, for me in particular, that's what it did for Thor Ragnarok. However, don't let that put you guys off, because that's just my opinion. Like I said, there's not a lot to dislike about Thor Ragnarok. It is still a really well-made movie, it's really funny, and ultimately, I do think you guys should go see it. So overall, to conclude my review, yes, Thor Ragnarok was a really good movie. It delivered in all of the things it really should have delivered. In terms of action, special effects, humour, the acting, the direction. In terms of the majority of things, it really did deliver as a Marvel movie should. I ultimately just feel like it was a little bit overhyped. But ultimately, I am happy that Taika Waititi got his first Hollywood movie, and I'm ultimately happy that this movie is done as well as it did. I'm going to give Thor Ragnarok a 4 out of 5. So overall, guys, thank you so much for watching. Please let me know your thoughts down in the comments below, as your opinions really mean a lot to me. I'll hopefully see you in another video very soon. Until then, though, take care.